Dominic Leong. I'm architect partner at Leong Leong with my brother Chris. I just want to say it's just such a great privilege to be here speaking with such incredible people doing beautiful and brave work. I also want to give a shout out to Dave Kamara, one of the Young Climate Prize winners, who I had the privilege of mentoring. Congratulations, Dave. Welcome to New York City. In many ways, what I'm going to talk about is sort of a transition from the more than human back to the human, knowing that the care for these two forms of life, or multi-forms of life, is really interconnected. So in our practice with my brother and partner, Chris, we really think about home and different versions of home. Partly because much of our work involves some sort of housing, whether it's social housing or a private home. And since we're curious people like you all, we believe that architecture should rise to our most pressing challenges and help imagine new futures. We're not interested in any single typology or project, but rather the whole ecosystem of spaces and experiences that make up our everyday lives, that shape culture, that hold us together as communities, but also as a planetary civilization. And within these ecosystems and life worlds where we live and eat and learn and play, we've been curious about who feels at home in these spaces. Whose bodies are these spaces designed for? How does form and materiality come together to make a stool, a house, or an institution feel like it opens up new worlds for you? How can architecture spark a sense of curiosity and comfort in our everyday lives? So if home is not a house, then what is it? And what does it mean to ask this question today? And whose home are we talking about? And what does it mean to think about home within our housing crisis, within our ecological crisis? What does it mean to recover ideas of home that have been erased? What does it mean to think about home across scales and geographies? And how do we not just live together, but how do we live together well? What we do know is that home today has to respond to many social and ecological needs that are inseparable. So when I think about home, in the context of Napa Valley, where Chris and I grew up, life has changed drastically because of the wildfires in just a matter of a few years. Places that I remember as lush green forest were literally scorched, homes and communities across California decimated within hours, sometimes even minutes. So in our climate crisis, home is in a fire zone. You may have heard of the harrowing stories of people jumping into their swimming pools or surviving the fires by hiding in their basements. So when we were asked to design a home on a steep hill in Mount Washington in Los Angeles, we thought about creating a home as a refuge in a wildfire. What was needed was a stark contrast to the sprawling, light and airy, iconic case study homes of the last century, which were notoriously under-insulated. Instead, we designed a compact and passively cooled home that could save its inhabitants from a fast-moving wildfire. Prefabricated modules stacked on top of a concrete plinth that serves as a safe zone. Sandwiched between the modules is a stairwell that connects each floor, acting as a thermal chimney, pulling air through the various living spaces on each level. But home can also consider our climate far into the future as a net zero sanctuary devoted to living with art. For this project, we were given a very interesting brief by a family in Los Angeles to renovate their existing home. The couple, who run a contemporary art gallery, asked us to do three things. First was to create an environment that felt like it was a home for art, but not saturated with it. The second was to make the home as sustainable as possible and only renovate 50% of this existing suburban house. And last was to challenge the aesthetic and programmatic cliches of domesticity. So we began exploring ways to take this suburban house and reconfigure its relationship with the entire lot. We were interested in how a series of figures or a composition of walls could create new relationships between the inside and the outside, delineating public and private areas of domestic life with a sequence of outdoor rooms and courtyards where the kitchen and the playroom overlooked a xeriscape rock garden. And rather than a living room, the couple envisioned a soundproof media cube and a TV film screening. Sorry, a media room for TV and film screening. So So while that project was thinking about how to live with art, this next project thinks about how to care for artists and support creative communities. So how can home be a hub for artists? Ray Philly is a community hub for artists designed with partners who intimately understand the needs of contemporary artists. And that artists across the country, especially in places like Philadelphia, exist in a community no matter who they are or what they make. Philadelphia is a city with very distinct neighborhoods with artists in all of them. So to create a hub that spoke to artists across the city required building thoughtful relationships and understanding the context. When we began working on this project at the beginning of the pandemic, we were excited about what seemed like a unique opportunity to design a place to support the local art and creative community in Philadelphia. So Ray Philly is situated on the border of Fishtown and Kensington, a historic industrial neighborhood that houses several longstanding arts organizations like Crane Arts. To build Ray, we had to be in conversation with these neighbors to ensure we were adding another cultural asset to the neighborhood that would be needed and welcome. The project takes a thoughtful approach to understanding how development can work with an existing context and community to offer a cultural hub and think of space as a resource. As forming partnerships with longstanding artists like Clay Studios, the neighbor just down the street, or becoming a new home for Ulysses, a Philly-based art publisher and bookstore. Ray invited the artist Michelle Lopez, who lives in Philly, to do a site-specific installation on the facade of the building. In Michelle's research into the history of industrial labor in the neighborhood, the work honors the communities of people that had been there before. Named Wind Under One Sky, it became a contemporary crown for the building and how it meets the sky. You can see it on the upper left there. And for us as architects, what this meant was to lean into the materiality of the historic buildings and think about how to work with brick in a tactile way that would be material story tied to its place through a sense of depth and relief, not as easy feat in typical development constraints. We brought the sense of materiality into the interiors where an installation by the artist Rashid Johnson will find its home for people to live with and make their own work in a workshop or a flexible photo studio. We wanted the building to connect to the life of the neighborhood, to literally be able to open its doors along the sidewalk, where artist studios like Michelle Lopez and galleries and small shops can all coexist and become part of the everyday life of the neighborhood. So there's these garage doors that essentially open up the studios and the different spaces that allow this kind of free-flowing from the neighborhood in. And like artists, all kinds of communities need care, especially those that have been marginalized for generations. When we were commissioned to design a new home for the Los Angeles LGBT Center in Hollywood, it was an opportunity to think about home as an intergenerational network of needs that gives a civic presence to the LGBT community within the city of Los Angeles. The campus converges social services and affordable housing that were spread across Hollywood and originated in the network of liberation houses, which were home to grassroots activism in LA's queer community in the 1970s. It's an urban campus that translates between the institutional and the domestic, a collection of programmatic forms unified by their materiality and porosity, and courtyards that connect and buffer privacy while providing safe outdoor spaces for seniors and youth. The heart of the campus is Pride Hall, a multi-purpose space that opens directly onto a new public plaza. And can be a venue for anything from a wedding to an Earth, Wind, and Fire dance class.
More, here we go. 5, 6, 5, 6 to the right, to the right. Step out and slide. Kick.
I love that clip. And as we transition from home at the scale of civic care, we come back to the idea that home is not a house, but home as a ritual of care, One of the most iconic homes of the 20th century is the Schindler House, designed by Rudolf Schindler in 1922 as a unique experiment in domesticity. It was designed for two families that were to live together in connected but separate parts of the house. But the history of this home is complicated, and much of it has been erased. We were invited to participate in an exhibition curated by Mimi Zeiger titled Soft Schindler that recovered the story of Pauline Schindler, Rudolph's wife, whose presence in the history of the house has been all but erased. Reflecting on the life of the house as an experiment in domesticity, we designed 3 stone vessels for a culinary experiment, inviting 2 fermentation experts, Ai Fujimoto and Jessica Wang. I and Jessica spent 3 months fermenting miso and lemons that were then served at a dinner where we invited artists and designers and curators from across Los Angeles to bring domestic life back into the house. For us, this project was about recognizing that home is not just an object or a single space, but is complex and relational. A network of spaces and connections that make up everyday lives, some material, some immaterial, some formal, some informal, some permanent, some ephemeral, some that are fixed, and some that will always be fluid. In the end, home is about people. So my wife Dina and I had our first baby a few months ago. You might have heard her in the back earlier. And it's really reinforced how important this idea of home is, and how fortunate we are to be in such an incredible community of artists and creators and designers and thinkers who really care about the world. There she is. She goes by Mango. So I want to thank Beatrice and the World Around team for making its own version of home for this community, and for our practice, making home at different scales and different contexts for different people is not possible without visionary partners like Dasha Zukova and the Ray team, Joseph Ver and Esther Kim, Lori Jean and the Los Angeles LGBT Center, and Mimi Zeiger and the Mack Center. Thank you for always grounding people and their needs. It helps us all remember that architecture is a future that we build together. And I'll leave you with a sketch of home by my 9-year-old nephew, who's not here, unfortunately, which gives me some hope that maybe the future is brighter than we think. Thank you.